Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Marla and I'm so glad you've joined me today. We are going to talk about the key ingredients to create stunning cards. I absolutely love layering and I think that nested dies are some of my favorites to add texture and dimension to cards. This is a background stamp we're going to be watercoloring. It's called Floral Background. It's new from Brass and Bliss. There are several sentiments: happiest of birthdays, thinking of you, sending love and hugs your way, and you are my sunshine. So it is packed with lots of sentiments that you can use to build a card, even if you just wanted to do the one layer. I'm going to be doing some heat embossing, so I do need to use my anti-static tool on this cardstock. I have Fabriano Artistico watercolor paper. We're going to be doing some watercoloring. I have the smoothest of the two sides that is facing up. I've inked my stamp with Versamark ink and I am doing some heavy compression stamping. Because this watercolor cardstock is going to have more texture than a smooth cardstock, I do need to make sure, since I'm using that white embossing powder and not ink, that I am getting a good impression. I don't want to have to redo this, so I just press a little bit harder, especially on the edges and in the center, to make sure that I have that perfect impression. I added some Brutus Monroe Alabaster White embossing powder over the top, and then I'll use my Wagner heat tool to heat set the image. This is going to be a little bit difficult to see. You'll be able to see a little bit of it. And then I have this on my Altenew mat. I just pulled it out of the stamp wheel. I spritzed it with a little bit of water using my distress sprayer. And we're going to use some Peerless Watercolors today for our watercoloring. These are available online. This is an older product that I've had in my stash forever. They were little cards that had highly pigmented watercolor on them. You could cut little pieces off at a time, and as you can see, that little piece of cardstock with that watercolor on it really has a vibrant color. I'm going to be layering this up. We know that watercolors tend to dry back because of the water that we're using to move the ink. So there's water on the background. I added water onto my flat brush. I spritzed my little panels with water, and then I just dip my brush in and I'm adding the color all around this background, which is going to highlight and resist where I've added the heat embossing. When you're working with watercolors, I've said this many times, you like to build up your color. I wanted to get a little bit more movement, so I just spritzed that background with some water to get some of that ink moving. And then I'll use my Ranger heat tool, which is going to allow a wider disbursement of heat than my heat embossing tool, and that is going to prevent warping and prevent burning of that embossing powder. So I'll use that to dry. And then any areas where I have some pooling of water or too much watercolor, I'll just use that damp paper towel to pick some of that up. Once we get this dried, I'll know exactly where I want to add additional color. And this is where I'm going to start mixing colors to get different color combinations. So my panel is dry. And here I'm just going to start adding some of that yellow where it dried back and it was a little bit lighter. I'll add a little bit of orange to some of the areas that are pink, and that pink and orange is going to give me more of a coral background. So this is going to be the first layer of my card. My card is going to be an A2 top folding white card base. And this is going to be the focal point. So I like to, when I have layers, I like to have a single focal point. And for this one, it's going to be the Brass and Bliss Hellabora Floral. This is a beautiful floral cluster. We're using similar colors or the same colors that are going to complement our background to do our watercoloring. You'll notice that I have a much smaller brush, and for this, I'm adding the ink to small areas of the flowers, and then I move on and let that ink dry a little bit. I want to add a little bit of the pink in. And so I'll add it to different areas of the flowers. For the centers, I'll use the yellow, and then I'll use the green that's over to the right for the stems. I don't add all of the ink color at one time. You like to build up color when you're watercoloring. You don't want to oversaturate your colors because it's nice to have some light spots, dark spots, and light areas and dark areas, shadows, highlights. And so I just try to add, my first layer is definitely going to be a much lighter layer. Now, I'm not going to show you all of the watercoloring just for the sake of time, but once I get this colored, I am going to use the coordinating Hellabora Floral Die. And one of the nice things about this die is not only does it cut out the floral, but it also cuts out the sentiments. For this one, we have You Are So Special, which is going to be the sentiment we're using today. Another one that says, And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Thinking of you, sending you birthday wishes, happy birthday, and so happy for you. So this is really a nice all occasion stamp set, and this floral is absolutely gorgeous. When I did my watercoloring, because I was using the white on white, so the white embossing powder and the white cardstock, I did get some ink in an area that I didn't want it, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about how I fixed that. But first, let's get back to the card, and this is the first layer. We are going to be using the nested small scallop with holes die, and I will cut my panel down. And you'll see just how beautiful this is. It's slightly smaller than an A2 panel. I'm going to use one of the medium rectangles to cut a layer out of white cardstock. And then here is another tip. Instead of sticking with just the white cardstock, I'm going to add a little bit more texture, and I have this background die, and it's a wood grain like a parquet. I'm using my embossing mat. So instead of cutting the panel, we're going to emboss that wood grain impression into the background. And this is another layer of interest and texture, which is going to add more to our card. So here you can see the background panel against the A2. And then you can see the different layers that we're going to be using. So I do have that second scallop rectangle that I've cut, and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow watercolor to the background. Again, adding some more interest. And in addition to that, I'm going to dry it with my heat tool, and then I'm going to use from Brass and Bliss, this is called a French script background. I'm going to ink it up with some pink ink, spritz it with some water, and then I'm going to just add my little piece of cardstock over the stamp. Sorry about that. And there you can see we have another layer. Now I don't want that to be centered because it's just going to cover it up. So this is going to allow me to offset that flower, again, creating more layers. Here's the sentiment that we're using today, and this one says, You Are So Special. I have cut it out of some white cardstock, and then I'm using the inlay technique to align my stamp. I'm using that same pink ink. I put my die cut back in there, and I'll get a perfectly stamped image. And then I cut this 2 more times for a total of 3 times, and that will add a little bit of dimension to my sentiment. So here are all of our layers. We have our first layer where we did some watercoloring. That was the base layer. It set the tone for the rest of our card. So the colors that we were using, those pinks and oranges and yellows, set the tone. We added some foam tape to our layer that has the French script. We're going to center this wood grain layer over top. Now, this is one suggestion I would make. Instead of wasting the center of that card panel, that watercolored card panel, use a rectangle die. I don't know what I was thinking, but I should have used another rectangle die just to cut out part of that center so that I could have used that beautiful watercoloring background on another card. I like to add texture with ribbon, and this is some twine, so I'm just going to wrap it around my card panel and adhere it with some tape before cutting that thread away. And then I'm going to add foam tape to the back of this panel as well. The foam tape that I'm using is not a really thick foam tape, so this isn't going to add super bulky dimension. I definitely have some foam tape that's a little bit thicker than this, but this is the one that I tend to use most often because it allows me to get multiple levels of dimension and interest on my cards. So here you can see we have that third layer. I've added the foam tape to the background, and we're going to adhere that to our A2 top folding card panel. So we're going to have that little bit of white peeking out. Because I did add foam tape to that French script layer, I do need to add a little bit of foam tape to the back of the flower. So I've added some to the outer edges, and then I'll add glue to the background that's going to sit on that French script. Again, we're going to offset it instead of placing it in the center of the card so that we can see that beautiful script background. And then we will add a bow, and I'll use my reverse tweezers to hold that in place. But first I'm going to add the sentiment. And again, here is another layer because as I mentioned, that sentiment does have 3 different layers. And we'll add our bow. Once we add our bow, I do have a little button that I'm going to add to the center of the bow, again, adding additional dimension and texture. So if you really want to up your game, it takes a little bit more time, but it doesn't take a lot of energy when you're using nesting dies and stamps. I hope that this gave you some ideas and tips to try on your own cards. I think this is absolutely beautiful. The Brass Bliss release just dropped today. There is an Instagram hop. I will link to my Instagram account if you'd like to follow along for a chance to win a gift card. Until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks for watching.